It's just business. Family tried to scam me out of $120,000, so I took their house. I learned 3 things from my old man before he passed. 1, measure twice, cut once. 2, a handshake means nothing without paperwork. 3, blood might be thicker than water, but water doesn't show up at your door crying about a hard money loan at 12% interest. My name's Mike. I'm 53 years old, and I spent 35 of those years in construction. Not the kind where you wear a hard hat for the Instagram photos and call yourself a developer. The real kind. The kind where fiberglass gets in your lungs and splinters find their way under your nails no matter how careful you are. I've rebuilt foundations that were older than most people's grandparents. I've rewired houses that should have burned down decades ago. And I've learned that in this business, like in life, everything eventually settles. Buildings settle. Debts settle. And people, well, they settle too one way or another. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was in my garage, restoring an old toolbox my father had given me, when my phone buzzed. Lisa, my younger sister. I almost didn't answer. In my experience, family calls after 8 p.m. fall into 2 categories. Someone died or someone need money. Given that Mom had passed 2 years prior and Dad 7 years before that, I had a pretty good idea which category this was. I answered anyway. Her voice was shaking before she even said hello. The kind of shaking that comes from crying so hard you can barely breathe. In the background, I could hear her husband Brad, his voice tight with that specific kind of panic that comes when a man realizes he's in over his head, but his ego won't let him admit it yet. She asked if she could come over. She needed to talk. It was urgent. 20 minutes later, they were sitting at my kitchen table. Lisa's eyes were red and swollen. Brad kept fidgeting with his car keys, the ones attached to the BMW keychain. Least I knew, everything about Brad was leased or leveraged. He was a realtor, the kind who talked a big game about disrupting the market and creating wealth through strategic property acquisition. In reality, he was 3 months behind on his own mortgage and drove around in a car he couldn't afford to impress clients he didn't have. The story came out in pieces, interrupted by Lisa's sobbing and Brad's attempts to spin it into something that didn't sound like complete financial suicide. 6 months ago, they'd gotten into house flipping. Brad had convinced Lisa it was their ticket out of the middle-class grind. He'd found a property, a rundown 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood that was supposedly up-and-coming. The price was right, because the place was a disaster. Foundation issues, electrical from the 1960s, a roof that was more moss than shingles. They'd secured a hard money loan. For those who don't know, that's basically a loan from private investors who charge interest rates that would make a mob enforcer blush. 12 to 15%, sometimes more. The catch is you have to flip fast, or the interest eats you alive. They'd budgeted for professional contractors to do the work, except the first contractor took their deposit and disappeared. The second one showed up drunk and tried to rewire the kitchen with speaker cable. The third one took one look at the foundation and told them to condemn the building. Now they were 4 months into the loan with maybe 20% of the work done and no money left to pay anyone who actually knew what they were doing. The monthly interest alone was eating them alive. If they didn't flip this house soon, the lender would foreclose. And because they'd used their own home as collateral to secure part down payment, they wouldn't just lose the flip house. They'd lose everything. Lisa grabbed my hand across the table. Her fingers were cold. She looked at me with the same eyes that used to beg me to let her tag along when I went fishing as a kid, and she said the words that would change everything. Mike, if we don't finish this flip, the bank takes our house. We lose everything. Our home, our credit, everything we've worked for. You're the only person I know who can save us. I looked at Brad. He was staring at the table, his jaw clenched. His pride was taking a beating having to sit here while his wife begged her older brother for help, but not enough of a beating to stop him from being here. I should have said no. I should have told him that this was exactly the kind of mess you get into when you watch too many HGTV shows and think real estate is easy money. I should have explained that I was semi-retired, that my back was what it used to be, that I'd already put in my time crawling through crawl spaces and breathing in decades-old dust. But I didn't say no, because she was right. Blood might not be thicker than water, but it's thicker than common sense sometimes. And I could hear my father's voice in my head, the one that said family takes care of family, even when family makes stupid decisions. I told him I'd do it, but I had conditions. First, this wasn't charity. I wasn't working for free or for some vague promise of gratitude. We were splitting the profit 50-50 after expenses. Lisa nodded immediately. Brad's eyes flickered with something, calculation maybe, but he nodded too. Second, I was in charge. Completely. No second guessing. No Brad showing up with YouTube ideas about how to save money by using the wrong materials. If I said we needed to tear something down to the studs, we tore it down to the studs. They agreed. Third, and this was important, everything went on paper. Everything. We document every hour, every material purchase, every decision. I'd seen too many family businesses implode because someone remembered things differently 6 months down the line. Brad looked annoyed at this, like I was being paranoid, but he agreed to that too. We shook hands. Lisa hugged me so tight, I thought she might crack a rib. Brad gave me one of those bro handshakes that guys do when they want to seem grateful, but also want you to know they're still alpha dogs. As they left, I watched Brad's taillights disappear down my street, and I felt that little voice in my head, the one that sounds like my father whispering a warning. The wider the smile, the tighter the contract needs to be. I should have listened to that voice more carefully. The next day, I drove out to see the property. Brad had texted me the address with a bunch of fire emojis and the words, "Ready to crush this project, bro." The house was in a subdivision that had been built in the 70s, back when developers thought avocado green appliances and shag carpeting were the future. The neighborhood wasn't terrible. Decent schools nearby, some new families moving in. The kind of place where if you fix it up right, you could probably get $20,000 to $30,000 over what they paid. If you fix it up right. The house itself looked like it had given up on life sometime during the Reagan administration. The siding was rotting, the front steps were nearly collapsed, and there was a smell coming from inside that I recognized immediately. Mold. Probably black mold, which meant I'd be spending quality time in a respirator. I walked through with my clipboard, making notes. The foundation had settled unevenly, creating cracks in the drywall that spiderwebbed across every room. The electrical panel was a fire hazard, one of those old Federal Pacific boxes that insurance companies refused to cover. The plumbing was a mix of copper, galvanized steel, and what appeared to be someone's creative experiment with PVC. The roof had at least 3 layers of shingles on it, which meant it wasn't just a recovered job. We had to tear off everything and start fresh. This wasn't a flip. This was a resurrection. Brad showed up while I was in the basement, examining the floor joists. He was wearing boat shoes with no socks and pants that probably cost more than my first car. He picked his way across the muddy floor, like he was navigating a minefield. He started talking about the vision, about how this was going to be a showcase property, about how his real estate connections were going to get us top dollar. I let him talk while I shined my flashlight on a support beam that was more termite than wood. Then I stopped him. I told him we had a problem. Actually, we had about 40 problems, but the biggest one was legal. The hard money. Lender was getting nervous. They wanted proof that there was a licensed general contractor on the job. Without that, they weren't releasing the next tranche of funds for materials. We needed those funds, or the project died right here. Brad's face went pale. He asked what we needed to do. I pulled out a folder from my truck. Inside was a document I prepared the night before. It was titled Scope of Work and Payment Authorization. I told him it was standard procedure. The bank needed confirmation that I was officially the general contractor on the project. They needed my license number, my insurance information, and his signature authorizing the work. What I didn't emphasize, what I let him assume was just boilerplate legal language, was the second page. The page that laid out in very clear terms that if the agreed-upon profit-sharing arrangement was breached, my compensation would revert to my standard commercial rate of $85 per hour plus materials, with a 20% administrative fee for change orders and payment disputes. Brad was on his phone, halfway through an argument with someone about a showing that had fallen through. He barely glanced at the document. He flipped through it, saw words like authorization and insurance requirement and bank compliance, and grabbed my pen. He signed it while telling whoever was on the phone that they needed to price the property more aggressively. He didn't read the fine print. He didn't ask questions. He just signed, slid it back to me, and went back to his phone call, walking out to his BMW because the reception was better outside. I stood there in that moldy basement, holding a signed contract that Brad had no idea he'd just agreed to, and I felt my father's voice again. Son, the best insurance policy is the one you hope you never have to use. I folded the contract carefully and put it back in my truck. The next 3 months were hell. Real hell, not the metaphorical kind, but the actual kind where you wake up at 5:30 in the morning with your back screaming and go to bed at 9 at night covered in sawdust and fiberglass. The kind where you skip lunch because you're in the middle of sistering a floor joist, and if you stop now, you'll lose your momentum. The kind where you breathe through a respirator for so long that you forget what fresh air tastes like. I gutted that house down to the bones. Literally. Tore out every wall that wasn't load-bearing. Ripped up floors that had been installed during the Nixon administration. Pulled wiring that was so old it was wrapped in cloth insulation. I spent 2 full weeks in crawl space, jacking up the foundation and reinforcing it with pressure-treated lumber and concrete piers. The work was hard. The work was necessary. And the work was lonely. Brad showed up maybe once a week, always in clean clothes, always with his phone in his hand. He'd walk through, nod appreciatively at whatever progress I'd made, take a few photos for his Instagram stories with hashtags like #hustlehard and #realestate-life and #wealthbuilder, and then he'd leave because he had a showing or a meeting or a conference call. He never picked up a hammer, never held a drill, never got on his knees to help scrape up 40-year-old linoleum adhesive that had probably given multiple generations of homeowners cancer. Lisa came by more often, usually bringing lunch or coffee. She'd apologize for not being able to help more, but she was working double shifts at the hospital to keep their regular bills paid, while Brad's real estate commissions mysteriously never seemed to materialize. She looked around at the progress, tears in her eyes, thanking me over and over. I never told her about the contract, about the insurance policy I created, because at that point, I didn't think I'd need it. At that point, I still believed that 50-50 meant 50-50, and that family meant something. I was wrong about that. By mid-June, the house was transformed. New foundation, properly reinforced. Updated electrical, with a modern panel that wouldn't fail inspection. PX plumbing throughout, all to code. New insulation, new drywall. Fresh paint in those neutral colors that HGTV says buyers love. Laminate flooring that looked like hardwood, but cost a fraction of the price. Updated kitchen with stock cabinets that I'd install myself, making them look custom with some crown molding and the right hardware. Bathrooms with subway tile and modern fixtures. It was good work, honest work, the kind of work that would last. Brad scheduled an open house for the last Sunday in June. He'd hired a staging company, which surprised me since I didn't think they had any money left, but apparently Brad had maxed out another credit card. The furniture was all rented, carefully arranged to make the 1,200 square feet look spacious and inviting. I showed up that Sunday in my work clothes. I wasn't planning to stay long. I just wanted to install the last piece of baseboard trim in the hallway, something I'd forgotten to finish the day before. It was a small thing, but I don't leave jobs unfinished. The house was full of people, potential buyers, mostly young couples, walking through that look in their eyes that comes from seeing something they could maybe afford if they stretch their budget just a little. Brad was in full realtor mode, laughing loudly, talking about the neighborhood demographics, throwing around phrases like excellent investment opportunity and price a move. Nobody introduced me to anyone. I was just some guy in Carhartt pants with a nail gun, finishing trim work in the corner. Around 3 in the afternoon, after most of the visitors had left, Brad and Lisa pulled me aside. They wanted to talk in the garage, away from the few remaining potential buyers who were doing second walkthroughs. The garage still smelled like fresh concrete. I'd report the floor myself after discovering the old one was cracked beyond repair. Brad closed the door behind us, and something in his posture told me this wasn't going to be a conversation about how grateful they were. He started talking about the market, about how things had shifted in the last few months, about how comparable properties in the area were selling for less than they projected, about how the holding costs, the interest on the hard money loan, had eaten into their margins more than expected. Then he got to the point. They'd run the numbers multiple times with different scenarios. And the reality was the 50-50 split they'd agreed to wasn't feasible anymore. They'd lose money at that split. They'd be better off walking away and declaring bankruptcy. But they didn't want to do that to me. They appreciated everything I'd done. So they'd come up with an alternative. Brad pulled out an envelope from his pocket. Inside was a check. $5,000. He called it a bonus. A thank you for all my help. He said it was all they could afford and still break even on the project. He said this was business, nothing personal. He said I'd understand if I thought about it logically. Then he asked for the keys back. Said they'd already changed the codes on the new smart locks I'd installed. I stood there in that garage, looking at the check in my hand, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Anger is hot and impulsive. This was different. This was a feeling you get when you realize you've been played, when you understand that someone looked at your trust and decided it was worth exactly $5,000. I'd logged over 800 hours on this project. That was 800 hours at my standard commercial rate of $85 per hour. $72,000 in labor alone, not counting the materials I'd fronted when their accounts were empty, not counting the expertise that had saved them from catastrophic mistakes, not counting the warranty issues I prevented by doing things right instead of fast. And they were offering me $5,000. Brad was looking at me expectantly, like he thought I might argue or make a scene. Lisa was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I could see tears on her cheeks, but I didn't know if they were tears of guilt or tears of relief that this awkward conversation was almost over. I took the check. I folded it carefully and put it in my wallet. He didn't ask me to sign a lien waiver. Rookie mistake. In construction, you never hand over a check without getting a signature that says paid in full, no outstanding claims. But Brad wasn't a builder. He was a gambler holding a hammer. I took my toolbox, the one my father had given me, the one I'd been restoring in my garage the night Lisa called. I picked up my nail gun and my compound miter saw, and my level, the one that had belonged to my grandfather. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't make promises about what I was going to do. I just looked at Brad, really looked at him, and said the only thing that mattered. You said this is business, Brad. Okay, let's do business. Then I walked out of that garage, loaded my tools into my truck, and drove home. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the contract Brad had signed 3 months earlier, the one he'd barely looked at, the one he thought was just a formality for the bank. I read through it again, paying special attention to page 2, section 3, subsection B. Then I opened my laptop and started creating an invoice. The math was simple. 847 hours at $85 per hour. Materials purchased on my accounts when theirs were declined. Administrative fees for the 3 major design changes Brad had requested. A 20% collection fee as stipulated in the contract for situations involving payment disputes. Total, $125,300. I had receipts for everything. Time logs I kept meticulously, knowing from experience that memory is a fragile thing when money gets involved. Credit card statements showing material purchases. Photos timestamped from my phone showing the progression of work. Text messages where Brad had approved various expenses. Everything documented. Everything provable. Monday morning, I drove to the county clerk's office. It's a building that most people never visit, a place that smells like old paper and bureaucracy. The woman behind the counter had worked there for probably 30 years, and she recognized me. I'd filed mechanics liens before, usually as leverage to get developers to pay their bills on time. But I'd never filed one against family. A mechanics lien, for those who don't know, is a legal claim against a property for unpaid work. It's a nuclear option in the construction world. Once it's filed, it attaches to the property title. The house can't be sold, can't be refinanced, can't be transferred until the lien is resolved. It's public record. It shows up on every title search. It's a scarlet letter that says someone didn't pay their bills. The clerk processed my paperwork without comment. She'd seen enough drama in her decade behind that counter to know better than to ask questions. The filing fee was $150. I paid it in cash. The lien was now official. $125,300 attached to property at 847 Riverside Drive, recorded in the county records. Searchable by anyone, especially by title companies doing their due diligence before closing. But I wasn't done. The law requires notification. You can't just ambush someone with a lien. You have to give them warning, a chance to dispute it before you file. Except I'd already filed, which meant I needed to send a courtesy notice explaining what I'd done and why. I drafted the letter that afternoon, kept it professional, stated the facts, outlined the contract, terms Brad had agreed to, included copies of the signed agreement, the invoice, and the filing receipt from the county. I explained that the lien would remain in place until the debt was satisfied in full, as was my legal right under state contractor laws. I sent it via certified mail, the kind with a green return receipt card that requires a signature, the kind that proves legally that someone received your letter, that they can't claim later they never knew. Then I went fishing. There's a spot I like about 40 miles north, where a creek feeds into a wider river. The catfish there are big and lazy, the kind that have been around long enough to know every trick, but still bite if you're patient. I brought my cooler with some cold beer and sandwiches. I brought a book I'd been meaning to read. I brought my phone, but I left it in the truck. I knew what was coming. I knew there'd be calls, angry texts, maybe even threats. But I also knew that none of that could start until Brad and Lisa received my letter, read it, and understood what I'd done. So I went fishing. I cast my line into the slow-moving water and waited for the world to catch up with my revenge. The call came 3 days later, Thursday afternoon. I was back home, working on replacing the deck boards on my back porch, when my phone started buzzing. It wasn't Lisa. It wasn't Brad. It was a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. The voice on the other end was female, professional, with that particular tone that people use when they're about to ruin someone's day and they know it. She identified herself as Rachel Sterling from Midwest Title and Escrow. She was calling regarding the property at 847 Riverside Drive. She asked if I was Michael Chun, licensed general contractor. I confirmed that I was. She explained that they were scheduled to close on property tomorrow, Friday at 2 p.m. During their routine title search, they discovered an active mechanics lien filed 6 days ago. The lien was for a substantial amount, over $100,000. Mr. Morrison had signed a sworn affidavit stating there were no outstanding debts on the property. That's technically perjury, Mr. Chun. We are freezing this transaction immediately. The buyers were, understandably, refusing to proceed until the lien was resolved. She asked if I was willing to release the lien or negotiate a settlement. I told her I'd be happy to release the lien immediately upon receipt of full payment, as outlined in my invoice. Until then, the lien stood. There was a pause. Then she thanked me for my time and said she'd be in contact with the sellers. I hung up and went back to replacing deck boards. 10 minutes later, my phone exploded. Brad called 17 times in a row. I didn't answer. Lisa texted, begging me to call her back. I didn't respond. Brad left voicemails that started angry, evolved into desperate, and ended with threats about lawsuits and family betrayal and how I'd regret this. I listened to all of them. Then I deleted them. Then I called my lawyer. His name was Tom Park. We'd gone to high school together, back when going to high school meant something different than it does now. He got me out of a payment dispute years ago when a developer tried to stiff me on a commercial job. He knew construction law inside and out. I explained the situation, sent him copies of everything, the contract, the invoice, the lien filing, the certified mail receipt showing delivery of my notice. He called me back an hour later, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Mike, this is airtight. The contract is clear. Your documentation is perfect. And they screwed up by not having you sign a lien waiver when they gave you that $5,000 check. That check actually helps you because it proves partial payment, which establishes the business relationship. They've got no way out of this that doesn't involve paying you. The next day, Friday, at 1:15 p.m., I was sitting on my back porch with a fresh cup of coffee when my phone rang. Lisa, I almost didn't answer. But something in me, maybe the last remnant of the person who believed family meant something, made me pick up. She was crying. Not the performative crying from that night in my kitchen 3 months ago, but the real kind. The kind that comes from watching your entire life collapse in real time. She told me the closing had been canceled. The buyers had walked away. They'd lost their earnest money deposit because the title company ruled that the undisclosed lien constituted seller fraud. The hard money lender had been notified and was starting foreclosure proceedings. They had 30 days before they lost the flip house. And because they'd used their personal home as collateral for part of the down payment, they were going to lose that too. She begged me to release the lien, said I was destroying them, said this was cruel, said family doesn't do this to family. I let her finish. Then I asked her a question I already knew the answer to. When Brad gave me that check and told me it was all I was getting, did you tell him it was wrong? Did you stand up for me at all? Silence. The kind that answers questions louder than words ever could. I told her I'd release the lien the moment I received payment according to the terms Brad agreed to. The contract he signed. The one he didn't bother reading because he was too busy on his phone pretending to be a real estate mogul. She started to say something else, but I hung up. Brad called an hour later. No more anger, just desperation. He offered to pay me $20,000, then $30,000, then $50,000. He said that was every cent they had left, everything they could scrape together from credit cards and loans from Lisa's parents. I told him the number was $125,300, not a penny less. He said that was impossible, that he didn't have it, that nobody would lend them that kind of money with the foreclosure proceeding already started. I told him that wasn't my problem. He hung up on me. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a different title company, a bank officer this time. The hard money lender had accelerated the foreclosure. They were taking the flip house to auction. As a lien holder, I was entitled to notification and had the right to bid on the property. The auction was scheduled for mid-August. I didn't go to the auction. I didn't need to. I knew how it would play out. The hard money lender would bid just enough to cover their outstanding loan plus fees. Maybe a small investor would show up and bid a few thousand more. But with an active lien on the property, most smart buyers would stay away. Too much risk, too much legal complexity. The house sold for $93,000. After the lender took their cut, there was nothing left. Brad and Lisa got zero. Worse than zero, actually. They still owed me $125,000, and now they had no asset to show for it. I could have pursued collection, could have gotten a judgment, garnished wages, made their lives a financial hell for the next decade. My lawyer told me I had an excellent case, but I didn't. Instead, I did something that probably surprised them. I filed a debt write-off, declared it as a business loss on my taxes. It offset my income from other jobs, saved me a chunk on taxes at the end of the year. Not a win, strictly speaking, but better than letting that money burn a hole in my pocket chasing people who had nothing left to give. Then I sent them one final letter, not through my lawyer, not certified mail, just a regular envelope with a stamp. Inside was a copy of the contract Brad had signed, the one he hadn't bothered to read. I'd highlighted the relevant sections. At the bottom, I'd written a single sentence. Foundations hold up houses. Contracts hold up businesses. Integrity holds up families. You decided to cheap out on all three. I never heard from them again. Well, that's not entirely true. I heard about them. Small town, word gets around. Their credit was destroyed. 7 years minimum before they could qualify for a real mortgage again. Brad lost his real estate license because complaints started piling up from other clients who'd had similar experiences. Turned out I wasn't the only person he'd tried to screw over. Lisa kept working at the hospital. Double shifts became triple shifts. They lost their house, moved into a rental. Last I heard, they were driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic. No more BMW. No more Instagram posts about wealth building and hustle culture. Sometimes I drive past a house on Riverside Drive. New owners fixed up a landscaping, added some shutters. It looks good. The foundation is solid. It'll last another 50 years at least, maybe more. Good work tends to do that. I think about that night in my kitchen sometimes, when Lisa was crying and Brad was fidgeting with his BMW keys. I think about how I could have said no, should have said no, would have saved myself 3 months of hell and a family relationship that's probably never coming back. But then I think about my father, about those 3 things he taught me. Measure twice, cut once. A handshake means nothing without paperwork. Blood might be thicker than water, but water doesn't pay the bills. He was right about all of it, especially the paperwork. Because in the end, that contract I prepared, the one Brad signed without reading while he was on his phone talking about pricing strategies and market disruption, that piece of paper meant everything. It meant the difference between being a sucker who got used by his own family and being a man who stood up for the value of his work. Some people might call what I did cold, ruthless, even. They might say family should forgive, should take the loss, should value relationships over money. Those people have never spent 800 hours rebuilding a house from the foundation up, while the person who's supposed to be your partner shows up once a week to take photos for social media. Those people have never had someone look them in the eye, someone they trusted, someone they share blood with, and tell them their work is worth $5,000 when it's worth 25 times that. Those people have never learned the hard way that in business, like in construction, everything eventually settles. And when it does, you better hope you're standing on solid ground. I'm sitting on my back porch right now, the one with the new deck boards I installed myself. The sun is setting, painting the sky those colors that no camera ever quite captures right. My father's toolbox is next to me, restored and organized. In a few minutes, I'll head inside, heat up some leftovers, maybe watch whatever game is on. Tomorrow I start a new job. Small bathroom remodel for an elderly couple who've saved for 3 years to afford it. Nothing fancy, but they've got the money up front. A signed contract with all the terms clearly spelled out and realistic expectations. It's honest work, the kind that matters. And this time, everyone knows exactly what they're signing.